From the historic campus of Hillsdale College in Hillsdale, Michigan, where the good, the true, and the beautiful are taught, nurtured, and honored, this is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, bringing the activity and education of the college to listeners across the country.
Need immigration reform in this country, but first of all, we need border security before anybody achieves any kind of legal status who's here and doesn't have it yet. We also need to understand that Americans who are here, who are citizens, have control over who joins us as Americans.
This is your host, Scot Bertram, and welcome to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. That was Joel Pollak, author of the recent book, The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. We'll talk with Joel in depth about that coming up later on in today's program. First, we're joined by Dr. Gary Wolfram. He is William Simon Professor of Economics and Public Policy, Director of Economics, and Professor of Political Economy at Hillsdale College, also the man with the giant business card. Dr. Wolfram, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me again.
Talking today about the Kamala Harris plan, and one that has been floated by others as well, taxing unrealized gains. Explain to us this idea as proposed in the Harris economic plan.
Well, taxing unrealized capital gains is that when you have let's say a stock or you have a business, what's going to happen is that you're going to be taxed on these gains, and this is going to lead to all sorts of problems, which we can talk about a little bit. But the way Kamala Harris has is that it's going to be on people who have wealth above $100 million, okay? There's about 11,000 of those people. But the idea is somehow the rich aren't paying enough in taxes. Mm-hmm. But what we really ought to realize is the top 1% of wage earners of income in the United States pay 46% of all the income taxes. The top 5% pay 2/3 of all the income taxes. The bottom 50% pay less than 15% of the income taxes. So indeed, the rich are paying a good deal of income tax, and I don't think people sort of realize that. They sort of get the idea that, they know how to get around it. But the reality is, like I said, the top 5% of income earners in the United States are paying 2/3 of the total income tax revenue.
Under the current rules, of course, you pay when you sell. There's a sell date. You know what the value is of whatever you sell to pay a tax on. Under a plan like this, there is no sell date. So when would you determine a value? At its peak, at a random date, at the end of the year? How would someone usually try to put that into play?
Well, the way they've proposed it is that you're supposed to figure out what the value of not just your stock, but the value of your business, the value of your property. Let's say you have, 2 houses, one of which you're renting. You have to figure out that value. And it says of December 31st. So the implication is that's going to be the date at which you would determine the value of all these things. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, that's going to be really difficult to do. Let's say you own, McDonald's, and you have 3 McDonald's franchises. How in the world are you going to figure out what the value of that McDonald's franchise is on December 31st? Compliance is going to be very difficult. For one thing, if I have an unrealized capital gain of, let's say, $5 million on the business, what if I don't have the income from the business? Because if it's a realized gain, then I'd have the income. But with an unrealized capital gain, I don't. So I may have to go ahead and sell my business just in order to pay the taxes. And then what happens, as you have implicated, what happens is if in February there's COVID hits and your restaurant franchises, the value of those go down substantially, how do you deal with that?
Right.
You don't get your money back, right? And so it really is nonsensical in order to make this thing happen.
Dr. Gary Wolfram with us talking about this plan to tax unrealized gains. I want to take two of those concepts and just spend another minute on them. One is this idea of, say, the value of a house. The value of a house is what someone's willing to pay for a house, and you don't know what that is until someone pays you for that house. Otherwise, you're just guessing. This makes thousands, tens of thousands of Americans now guessing at what their property, house, business might be worth.
Yes, and the question is, how is the government going to check on this? If you really think about it, how is the government going to know what the true value of your, like I said, 5 Wendy's franchises? How is it possibly know what the value of that thing is on December 31st? And just as something to put in as an aside, it's probably unconstitutional,
right?
Because it's not under the income tax, right? And the 16th Amendment made it so that a direct tax under the income tax doesn't have to be apportioned among the states. But this is not income because you're not getting the income. Mm-hmm. So it's a direct tax. It has to be apportioned according to the states, which means that, if California has all sorts of value here, they're going to have a tax which is much higher because the population is much higher in California. So realistically, the thing's probably not constitutional to begin with.
The other thing I wanted to return to is the idea that people who are heavily invested, own their own business, their wealth is not liquid. It might be a house. It might be the business. And as you allude to, government's going to say you owe us X no matter what. And they don't take IOUs necessarily. So
Right.
What happens, you've got all your wealth or a good portion of your wealth tied up in these illiquid assets. You got to sell them. That's going to warp markets everywhere.
That it's going to have a severe impact on the stock market, for one. I believe there's been a number of people that have talked about the effect of this on the stock market. And it creates all sorts of uncertainty. When I'm deciding whether to invest in a business, I don't really know what my tax liability is going to be. Not only do I not have to, I don't have to just know what the profit is, which I might be able to guess, but how can I really know what it would be worth if I were to sell the darn thing? Mm-hmm. So you create all sorts of uncertainty, and it would have I think it would have a severe effect on the stock market if this were to be put into place.
You mentioned this too, but there are economic downturns. There are stock market downturns. There are reasons a business in a particular city might fall on hard times.
Yes.
For any number of reasons. What happens? You paid a tax on a gain you didn't realize. Now that asset has depreciated. Are you getting a refund from the government?
Well, that's the question. Yes, they certainly haven't outlined what they would be doing. You would, it would be very, very difficult somehow to, put in a tax form that says, if you on your income tax, what happens? You don't get to put down negative income tax, and
right.
Somehow you get money back from the federal government, right? But here, it might be substantial amounts. If I have a $600 million business and let's say it goes bankrupt, during the course of the year, and its value goes to zero or maybe negative. How does the government going to treat that? That realistically, it's not something that's doable. But the average person, it's sort of interesting. He says that the problem with you, Watson, is you see but you don't observe. That's what Sherlock Holmes said. And the problem is the average American sees but they don't observe. If I come out and I say, "Oh man, we're going to tax these people with $100 million in wealth, and we're going to tax them on all their, the value of all their stuff," you're going, "Well, gee, that's not going to affect me." But the realism is, in fact, it's going to affect you. It's going to affect the stock market. It's going to affect, just retail businesses. It's going to affect restaurants. It's going to affect all sorts of things.
Dr. Gary Wolfram with us talking about the idea of taxing unrealized gains. To the market question, investment behavior, far more short-term trading would be involved, fewer long-term investments. Probably we're speculating a bit, crystal balling a bit, but in terms of investment strategy, investment behavior, how might that change?
Oh, I think it would have a very difficult. It would cause all sorts of problems in the investment market, no question. It's sort of interesting. Adam Smith said, "Little else is required to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice." This is clearly not easy taxes. Not even close.
And then just as we conclude, you mentioned this, but to sort of underscore this, there are constitutional legal questions that revolve around the entire issue of something that is not an income tax.
Yes, it is not income. And the 16th Amendment was what allowed the income tax to not have to be apportioned among the states. Because you're not realizing it, it's an unrealized gain, it's not income. So therefore, it's not going to be covered under the 16th Amendment. So, I would argue that this thing is clearly unconstitutional to start with. And if it were somehow to be implemented, it would cause all sorts of problems that, like Watson said, you got to be able, or Sherlock Holmes said, you got to be able to observe these other things.
Justice Antonin Scalia used to say that he wished he had a stamp that he could use that said, "Stupid, but constitutional." But for this one, we need a stamp that said, "Stupid and unconstitutional."
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Gary Wolfram, William Simon Professor of Economics and Public Policy, Director of Economics and Professor of Political Economy at Hillsdale College, as we talk about the Harris plan to tax unrealized gains. Dr. Wolfram, thanks so much for joining us on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Always fun to be here with you.
Up next, Joel Pollak tells us what Trump should do in his first 100 days. His new book is called The Agenda. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Great books, great people, and great ideas. Knowledge of these things is critical to becoming a well-educated human being. That's why I'd like to tell you about an easy and enjoyable way for you to listen and learn whenever and wherever you want. And that's through the Hillsdale Dialogues. If you haven't heard about the Dialogues, once a week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins radio veteran Hugh Hewitt to discuss topics of enduring relevance. From time to time, they also talk about current events, but always with an eye toward more fundamental truths. And they want you to listen in, to join a conversation like no other. The Hillsdale Dialogues are posted every Friday on podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu, or wherever you get your audio.
Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. Be sure to check out the Hillsdale College Podcast Network for older episodes of this show, plus other great Hillsdale audio. Podcast.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Joel Pollak. He is Senior Editor-at-Large for Breitbart News, also author of the new book, The Trump Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. Joel, thanks so much for joining us.
It is a real thrill and pleasure to be with you here in studio in Hillsdale, Michigan.
Glad to have you here. Glad to have you back on the program as well. The new book, The Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. Somewhat of a blueprint, perhaps, that Donald Trump could follow in another term in office. Why does he need something like this? Why did you decide to create something like this?
Those are two great questions, and I'll answer them in reverse order. Why did I decide to do this? I was watching the Trump trial in Manhattan from afar, following the coverage, and I was so frustrated and outraged that this was happening in our country, that this partisan prosecutor could pursue the former president and the leading opposition candidate for the presidency on such flimsy charges that were clearly politically motivated. And it seemed to me to be a third world tactic of a failing banana republic. And I was angry. And I went outside and took my flag down from outside my house and hung it upside down. I was distressed. And then I thought, no, this is not how I deal with problems. I like to think about the positive. So I thought, okay, let's envision Trump overcoming this challenge, America overcoming this challenge, and let's imagine Trump actually becomes president again. What does it look like? I put myself in the moment, January 20th, 2025, and that led me to your second question, or rather your first question, which I'm answering second, which is, why does he need a blueprint? The first thing that hit me as I thought about Trump taking the oath of office was that the media would immediately change their coverage of Trump and the presidential transition to, let's talk about 2028. He's a lame duck. There's nothing he can do. Let's look at the candidates. It's an open seat. They're going to want to talk about Gavin Newsom, my governor in California, all the other candidates. And so I realized to have any kind of impact, even if he does win, he's going to have to act very quickly. We have seen what happens when he relies on Republican leaders in Congress. Often they don't enact his agenda. If they do enact it, they take a long time to get around to it, by which time they've lost power, they can't do it. We've seen what happens if he waits for Democrats to compromise. They will dig in and refuse to do even things they want to do until they can be sure there's some political advantage in it for them. So even though I'm a skeptic of executive power, I said he's got to come in with executive orders, executive actions, policy changes, memoranda, things he can do as president that he can do on day one. And that's how this book, The Agenda, was born.
The very first chapter, and you can tell me if it's the very first thing perhaps you would recommend to this blueprint, concerns the rule of law. And there are all these prescriptions for pardons, for investigations. You are explicit as saying to launch an investigation of the Democratic Party itself. Push a little on that, meaning if Trump wins, he has won. He is president again. Why be involved in what some people would say a tit for tat? What is the benefit of engaging in that kind of behavior?
Well, on one level, it is said correctly that two wrongs don't make a right, but they do make a deterrent. And I think the Democratic Party has had free rein for several years now to investigate Republicans. The January 6th committee didn't simply look at what happened on January 6th. They subpoenaed hundreds of people, looked through their phone records, their emails. Essentially, the Democratic Party was able to use or abuse its investigative powers to build a massive trove of data on the opposition. I think that the Democratic Party no longer functions as a normal political party. It essentially has several arms. It operates through the media, through academia, through nonprofit organizations that are tax exempt for some reason, even though they only serve a partisan purpose. I think that there needs to be an investigation of how the Democratic Party works. Does it function as a political party, or is it something much deeper? We have reached the point that many third world societies, unfortunately, find themselves in, which is where the boundary between party and state begins to disintegrate. We joke and say the Democrats are the party of government, but there's a truth to that, and we need to unravel what that means, and we need to separate the party from the government. We have a system in which voters choose political parties to run the government, but we have, by now, a deeply ingrained institutional bias against Republicans. And in many communities, in many big cities, voters are not represented. Democrats, through their close association with public sector unions, can simply elect more Democrats who then sit down to negotiate with the same unions who are responsible for their election. The taxpayers have no representation in these discussions. It's time to unravel that. We have to actually get back to a democratic system where if you vote for a different party than the one in power, you get a different government, not the same government run by similar people.
This is a big deal because people are losing faith, have lost faith in our institutions, be it the media, be it government, FBI, CIA. Through the actions you prescribe in The Agenda, when it comes to rule of law, can one man in 4 years do enough to help reestablish that trust?
If it relies on one man, then it's not really rule of law. But I do think that he can start moving America in the right direction. And often I think it's simply a problem of Americans not realizing what direction to move in. We've been boiling the frog slowly, to use that metaphor, and we have actually slid so far away from the rule of law. I think it will take a few jarring changes by Trump to orient us in the right direction. It's then going to take a huge investment by Americans in restoring fairness to the system and the perception of fairness, which is equally important. This is most important to me because, again, of the origins of this book, watching the Manhattan trial. We simply can't have a system that allows a ruling party to do this to the opposition. That's how countries fail. I'm shocked that we've come as far as we have already down this road. We need to turn around. Even if we don't get all the way back to where we need to be, at least we need to face in the right direction.
Joe Pollak is with us. His new book, The Trump Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. Some people say they're single-issue voters. I think you have said the border is perhaps most important to you because a lot of problems stem from what's happened on our border. You recommend closing the border, including to legal immigration. Why take that particular step, and at what point might you reopen the border to legal immigration?
I am in favor of legal immigration. I'm a legal immigrant myself. I came here as a child with my parents, but I think we need a better legal immigration system. But as Trump said in 2015, we need to close things off until we figure out what's going on. We need immigration reform in this country, but first of all, we need border security before anybody achieves any kind of legal status who's here and doesn't have it yet. We also need to understand that Americans who are here, who are citizens, have control over who joins us as Americans. That's a basic right of citizenship. It can't simply be that the party in power decides who to let in and who doesn't come here. It can't be that we have an open border where there's no control. So I think we need to stop all immigration until we figure this out, until we have border security, and until we redesign our immigration laws to prioritize skills and to let people in who belong here. And then we can reopen the borders. Of course, there are emergency situations, asylum for people who are genuine refugees from political and religious persecution. I think we should keep that open. But that system is also being abused. We need to fix it before we do anything else. And what we learned from the first Trump term, through all the Supreme Court cases that he won, was that the president does have virtually unrestricted authority over immigration. Biden has chosen not to use it. And Trump can choose to use it to the maximum constitutional extent.
Do you think that the movement of migrants by Governor Abbott in Texas, Governor DeSantis in Florida, to blue cities, to sanctuary cities, do you think those maneuvers will have any true long-term repercussions on this issue?
Well, I think the migrants were going to end up in those cities anyway in some way because people go where job opportunities are, people go where relatives are, people go sometimes where they're smuggled or trafficked to go, unfortunately. But I do think that Abbott and DeSantis moving the migrants voluntarily was helpful because, first of all, it illustrated the hypocrisy of the blue state sanctuary city, sanctuary state policy. You're happy to have those policies, the open borders, as long as they affect other people. You're not willing to bear the consequences yourself. And I think it did get a conversation going among Democrats about why this is happening. And you're seeing a backlash, not against the Republican governors, although there is some of that, but a backlash against Democrats who have allowed this to happen. And there's no commitment from the Biden administration to end it. They've tried to say, well, we have this bill for border security. The problem is we've passed bills for border security before. Ronald Reagan signed an immigration reform bill that included border security, but it just never happened because if you put immigration reform and legalization at the same time as border security, you never get the border security. Border security is the hard part. Do the hard part first, and then you can do the rest of it.
Joel Pollak is with us. The Trump Agenda, his new book, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. When it comes to foreign policy, you recommend ending the war in Ukraine, moving toward a peace agreement there. I like your prescription to expand the exports of liquefied natural gas to Europe, an alternative to Russian energy. Defend Israel. It's a big issue for you. It should be a big issue for all of us. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris would say, hey, we have an unbreakable bond. We are friends forever. Okay, what does a true defense of Israel look like?
On national security issues, you allow Israel to do whatever it needs to do to defend itself. That was the Trump approach in his first term, and that's why there were no wars in the Middle East involving Israel for 4 years, because Israel's enemies knew that Israel would have a free hand in responding, so they didn't start anything. Second, and this is really important, cut off the money. Where does Hamas get these weapons from? The Israeli military discovered a subway underneath Gaza that Hamas had not just dug tunnels, but they had actually laid railroad tracks in these tunnels. Not for commuters going to work, but for terrorists to move weapons and people around underneath Gaza. Hundreds and hundreds of miles of tunnels. And all of that built with materials and with funding that ought to have gone to the improvement of the lives of Palestinians living in Gaza, the economy. When the money flows to these groups and when it flows to Iran, then you see terrorism, you see tunnels. And the tunnels, by the way, are also dug with slave labor, Palestinian children. Dozens have died digging these tunnels. Cut off the money and you end the terrorist enterprise. And Trump understood that. Biden restored a lot of the funds that Trump had cut off as soon as Biden took office. He restored $700 million to the UN Relief and Works Agency, whose employees participated in the October 7th terror attack. There are other examples as well. So you have to cut off the money. Trump understands that, and I think Iran understands that as well, which is why they're worried about Trump coming back into office. But that is basically the prescription. And then you can also get into creative ideas about peace. There are lots of things that can be done to improve the situation. But ending the restriction on Israel's self-defense and cutting off the money, those are the two things to start with.
On the topic of identity politics, you call for President Trump to embrace equality, reject equity. We have seen these large companies over the past few weeks and months extract themselves from DEI reporting. John Deere, Ford, Molson Coors. What does it look like for the federal government under a Trump administration to do something similar, to turn away from DEI and CRT?
Well, you have to get CRT, critical race theory, out of any educational materials, any training materials for federal employees. Critical race theory is the idea that our society is indelibly racist, marked from the beginning by slavery, which existed at the origins of our republic, and therefore, according to critical race theorists, is inherent in every institution. It views our entire society as corrupt. And we are a flawed society, like every human society, but every great reformer in American history, whether Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King Jr., has always appealed to the original principles in our founding documents and told us to live up to them. Our founding is not the problem. It's our human nature that is the problem, but our founding is actually noble. And we have to get rid of critical race theory for that reason, remind Americans that we actually have a shared vision that is positive and quite wonderful, actually. DEI and the drive toward equity. Equity basically means achieving equality of outcomes, which means you have to treat people unequally to get there. Equality means people are equal before the law, people have equal opportunities to achieve, and people will succeed to greater or lesser extents because of their own effort and their own skills, and that's okay. Different people are going to do different things. But the goal of public policy has to be to expand opportunity, not to achieve equal outcomes, because no society has ever achieved equal outcomes except by making most of the people equally poor. If we want to be Zimbabwe, we can choose to be Zimbabwe, but that's not a choice most Americans are willing to make, and that's why these companies are dumping their DEI policies, because ultimately they hurt the bottom line and they hurt company morale, and investors are starting to get the idea that this is a bad thing for a company to do and they don't want to be involved.
Joel Pollak is with us. The Trump Agenda is his new book, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. On the issue of the economy, something that struck me is the idea, which has been talked about off and on, moving more government departments out of D.C. to other parts of the country. It strikes me as this is a change that, once implemented, would be very hard to reverse. A subsequent Democratic administration would be hard-pressed to say, okay, we're bringing everyone back to D.C. now. Get prepared to pay higher real estate prices, higher taxes. Everyone come on back to D.C.
Right. There's no reason the Department of Agriculture needs to be in Washington, D.C. The Bureau of Land Management, most of what they manage is out west. Why not put the office out west, the Department of the Interior? Why does everything have to be in Washington, D.C.? And the problem politically with putting all of the administration in D.C. is that you then create a government class that is concentrated in one place, often separate from the rest of the country, and that can act in its own interest, separate from the rest of the country. Economically, there would be benefits to other parts of the country if you moved these large government departments out. And there would be benefits to the Treasury because Washington is a very expensive city. Other places are not as expensive. The cost of living is lower. And of course, there would be some resistance from federal employees in Washington, D.C. to moving. But as you point out, once people are resettled in a new place, that basically becomes the new norm. I do think there have been advantages to decentralization in the past, done for different reasons, of course, but we have Federal Reserve banks all over the place. We have various federal functions performed in different parts of the country, different parts of the world sometimes. There's no reason not to spread it out across America.
On the topic of infrastructure, we hear about replacing roads, repairing bridges. You discuss upgrading the electricity grid. And if it's talked about, generally it's in terms of we need it to handle all these new EVs that are coming online. But you identify it's vulnerable to attack. We all know, at least here in the Midwest, and you in California, if you're out there, when there are rolling blackouts or we have strong storms that move through, you don't have power for 2 days, 3 days. It is a eye-opening experience in terms of how much we rely on electricity all the time, every day. The electricity grid, is this kind of the soft target, unspoken soft target here in the country?
It is, and it's not just here and in California. Remember, Texas had major power outages when there was a deep freeze and the wind turbines stopped turning. We are aiming at reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, so we're shutting off energy sources. As a result, there is less resilience in the system to peak demand or to failures where they happen. And California has been vulnerable to rolling blackouts now that we've identified old transmission lines as a serious wildfire risk. The utilities in California shut down during periods of high wind. It's not really possible to run the world's most advanced economy this way anymore. And especially once you start getting into artificial intelligence and the energy that's needed to run data centers, we're going to need more electricity. And we can't continue to shut down and prevent fossil fuel production. Now, fossil fuel production has grown, as it did under the Obama administration, but that's in spite of the administration, not because of it. We need to unleash it even further. And I also talk about a sort of all of the above approach. There's nuclear power. I know that here in Michigan, they're restoring one of the old mothballed nuclear power plants. That needs to happen in other places as well. In California, there are nuclear power plants that are being shut down or in danger of being shut down. We have one left, really. Diablo Canyon could shut down soon. We're going to need more electricity, and we need to lower energy prices. That's a great silver bullet, if there ever was one, for lowering inflation, generating economic growth, and helping America get back to where it needs to be.
Final question for Joel Pollak, his new book, The Trump Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days, the final chapter on the Constitution, and a topic that you've been focused on, especially since October of last year. Recommendation to launch civil rights investigations of universities that deny free speech. This is so apparent and so in front of all of us with the pictures and stories we see. What's the incentive for universities to comply if they are threatened with these civil rights investigations? Why would they change their behavior?
Well, they would change their behavior because universities want to be seen doing the right thing, and because there are federal funding consequences that President Trump has already threatened if these universities don't stop the violation of the civil rights of Jewish students. There was a case recently in federal court in California that was won by 3 Jewish students at UCLA who sued for an injunction to force UCLA to obey federal civil rights laws. And UCLA was dragged kicking and screaming into court. They said, well, we know your rights are being violated, but it's not our fault. That was basically their argument. And the judge was shocked. And so shocked, in fact, that UCLA was shamed into not appealing his judgment anymore, Judge Mark Scarsi, who was a Trump appointee. But it's shocking to me that we have to rely on private plaintiffs, private legal actions to get these universities to comply. There is an Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education that is investigating many of the universities, but we've seen nothing from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Nothing. Merrick Garland has been basically invisible. Now, suddenly he has made an appearance in recent days. He has indicted 6 Hamas leaders for the October 7th terror attack 11 months after it happened. 3 of them are already dead. So he's capable of doing something, but it's all just symbolic. It's not relevant to what's happening in the Middle East. And it does show that he is holding back on using his powers and the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Justice to go after a violation of civil rights that's happening not just on one campus, but at many campuses, and is likely driven by organizations that are getting funding from a variety of sources, maybe foreign sources. We need investigations of that. We need RICO investigations. This is a real priority, and it's shocking, actually, that nothing has been done.
Joel Pollak is Senior Editor-at-Large at Breitbart News and also the author of the new book, The Trump Agenda, What Trump Should Do in His First 100 Days. Joel, thanks so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
Thanks for having me. I can't wait to come back to Hillsdale. It's such a wonderful place.
Up next, we talk with Dutton Kearney from Hillsdale's English department. We conclude his series about James Joyce by talking about Ulysses. I'm Scot Bertram. This is the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Do you believe in our founders' vision for America? That our republic will only survive if we are an educated and informed people who know our rights and duties. Since 1844, Hillsdale College has sought to educate all who wish to learn about these timeless principles of self-government. For more than 50 years, the college has worked to spread that mission by sending Imprimis to millions of Americans. Imprimis features some of the best speeches given at Hillsdale events, and now an audio version of the popular Speech Digest is available in a new podcast of the same name. And, like the print publication, Imprimis, the podcast, is always free. Listen to the best arguments from speakers such as Chris Rufo, Molly Hemingway, Mark Stein, and Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn, read by Hillsdale students. Subscribe today to listen to Imprimis at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. Welcome back to the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Scot Bertram. Head to radiohour.hillsdale.edu. While you're there, find radio affiliates in your area airing this show. Plus, subscribe to our email newsletter. Always get a note when there's a new episode. Click the subscribe button, enter your email address at radiohour.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Dr. Dutton Kearney. He is Associate Professor of English here at Hillsdale College. Dr. Kearney, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
We conclude our brief series on James Joyce with this conversation. We'll spend most of our time on Ulysses. I want to talk just briefly about Finnegans Wake at the end of this conversation as well. Ulysses we start with, though, loosely based on the famous Greek epic. In what ways does Joyce's novel emulate Homer's work?
Well, it emulates mostly by being an epic journey. What's nice about it is that it's called Ulysses, so that's the Latin word for Odysseus. And so what Joyce is telling us is that this is this epic that's been mediated already through another literary tradition, and now he's picking it up for the third time. I guess loosely written, we could loosely considered, we could think about it as a journey home. A Jewish man, Leopold Bloom, wakes up in the morning, has breakfast, and then goes into the city. He's asked to go to a funeral. He has to secure a renewal for an advertisement, and then he has to eat lunch. And so you follow him through the entire day, and then he meets up with Stephen Dedalus, and they walk back home. And so you get this return back home. But it functions on so many different levels. It's not like Odysseus being away for 10 years and then trying to get back for another 10 years. This is Leopold Bloom's wife, Molly, is having an affair. And so there's a return back to their marriage bed, and so all of the themes that we'll see in the Odyssey will crop up here and there, and the chapters are named after sections of the epic as well.
Ulysses is well known for playing with multiple literary genres inside. Talk a bit more about that.
Let's say, for example, the Aeolus episode in Chapter 7 is Bloom is going into the newspaper room, and there's hot air blowing all around because it's a printing press, right? But every section has a headline. And then there's a brief continuation of the narrative, and then another headline, and another continuation of the narrative. And if you were to parse out all the rhetorical tropes that are contained in that chapter, you'd have a list of, you'd pretty much be able to develop a rhetorical handbook based on that. You have an interior monologue in the Penelope episode. You have a catechetical episode, which is basically just Q&A all the way throughout. Where were they? And you get the exact latitude and longitude of where Stephen and Bloom are. And then you have these scenes that are really deep interior monologues. But you have something like the Oxen of the Sun, which gives us the entire history of the English language, describing one event or one phenomenon, the birthing hospital. But you get the origins of English, and then at the very end of the chapter, you have words that really don't have, like, you have a sign but not a signified. And so it's just really interesting to show how the evolution of language, that we still have, we have words that are waiting for their partner.
In a lot of ways, Ulysses is a puzzling novel for the reader. It takes time to understand. Was this an intentional move on Joyce's part?
Oh, definitely. I mean, he said, "I've put in so many puzzles into this thing. It's going to keep English professors busy for years." And so, as on behalf of all the English professors in the United States and England and Ireland, thank you. But then one thing that he did say is that it took me 7 years to write this book. It ought to take you 7 years to read this book. And there's something to that. And then what he also does is that he won't give you a one-to-one correspondence with scenes from the Odyssey with scenes from the Odyssey. There'll be something missing slightly, and then he throws in MacGuffins or red herrings.
Mm-hmm.
There's one man called. But we never know what his name is, and he's wearing a raincoat, wearing a Macintosh, and so he's at the funeral, and Bloom gets interviewed by the person who has to write the article, and Bloom says, "Well, there was that fellow with the Macintosh," and so in the listing of the funeral, here are all the people who were there, and Macintosh is presented as a proper noun, as the man's name, and so there isn't an answer for it,
yeah.
and Joyce did that on purpose.
Did it take you 7 years to fully understand Ulysses, and do you still find things as you go back and teach this to our Hillsdale students?
Definitely. The first time that I read it, what I did is that I took a month out of a summer and read a chapter a day. And it was so exhausting. But when you come back to it, certain sections are going to pop more than others, and so I think it's definitely a book that keeps on giving. It's not like, all right, well, I've solved the puzzle, I'm not going to come back and read it. There's a literary dimension to it as well.
Talking with Dr. Dutton Kearney about Ulysses and James Joyce. Joyce had said that he wished to give a picture of Dublin so complete that if the city suddenly disappeared from the earth, it could be reconstructed out of his book. Do you think he was successful, and can this be considered in some ways an ode to the city of Dublin?
Oh, definitely. In fact, all the streets are described in such a way that, so now in 2023, we have books full of annotations, and so we can trace Bloom and Stephen through the city step by step by step. You could do that in Dubliners too, but here it's just extraordinarily comprehensive. Ireland or Dublin loves him. I was there. I was in Dublin for Jonathan Swift's 350th anniversary, but it was during the summer, so it was May, and and Bloom's Day is June 16th. And so what they'll do is recreate. They'll read through the entire novel. People will walk the entire way, and so Dublin sees themselves reflected in it. And so I think that's what's so interesting is that Ulysses is a very, very simple story and a simple plot, but it has the most extraordinary, kind of the narratological apparatus that presents it.
This book, Ulysses, ends with use of stream of consciousness, which Joyce has done in the past. What do you think the choice here adds to the conclusion of the story, and what do you think Joyce is trying to evoke in his audience by doing it in this manner?
Well, we get I was about to say we get two principal narrators, but it's more like three. But we've been in Leopold Bloom's head all day long, and every single thought he has, we get to read it, and so you're going to be limited in that perspective. What happens at the very end with the Penelope episode is absolutely extraordinary. It's a series of 7 sentences with no punctuation. It's all stream of consciousness, and it's Molly Bloom about to fall asleep and everything that's on her mind. Finnegans Wake is going to be that same kind of dreamlike narrative, but at least Ulysses, the Penelope episode, makes a lot more sense. It's easier to understand because it's shorter. Mm-hmm. So what's really interesting is that in the end, what she does is that she chooses Bloom and commits to dropping her affair with Blazes Boylan. And I guess if you have a name like that, I suppose it's very difficult to not be tempted. And so in the end, she kind of says, my son or my husband Poldy, short for Leopold, has all these crazy ideas, and I listen to him, and really I do love him. And so I choose to be with him. But one thing that you see in men in general, this is Molly's perspective, is they just don't understand how the world works. And what's really fascinating is that for all of Joyce pushing against all traditionalism, say the Catholic Church through or monarchy or education or any of the institutions that he sees as falling apart, you have Molly Bloom at the end say that God exists and there are certain things that just can't be changed, and she has this Aristotelian realism that's right at the end of the book. And so, are we meant to see that as a capstone to the novel? Are we meant to see it as a perspective among many? I think Joyce leaves that for us to decide. But it's extraordinarily satisfying to read through the Penelope episode.
Dr. Dutton Kearney from Hillsdale talking about Ulysses, and you mentioned Finnegans Wake, and I don't want to end our conversation without talking a bit about that book. I'll just ask, is Finnegans Wake a great book from James Joyce, or is it a waste of his talent?
Well, both. There are two camps for that. Harold Bloom spent a lot of his time defending Finnegans Wake, and other people just say, "Oh, please." It's not any kind of novel that we've ever seen. Now, its influence is everywhere. The recent winner of the Nobel Prize writes a 745-page long novel, and so you get that from you get the influence of Finnegans Wake from that. But I think it's a book that it's not meant to be figured out. You can. I mean, there's a narrative there. But if you try to figure it out, if you approach it very rationally, you'll drown in it. But if you let it wash over you and you kind of experience the music of it, then in fact, there's something to be said. You can begin to see how poetry can communicate laterally through different associations. So the first line of the novel is "River run past even Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation back to Hoath Castle and environs." And then the last line of the novel is away, alone, alas, aloved, along the river run. So basically, the end of the book is the beginning of the book, and so it's on it's maybe the first continuous loop.
Dr. Dutton Kearney, Associate Professor of English here at Hillsdale College. Today we talk Ulysses and a little about Finnegans Wake, and you can go back and listen to the rest of our conversations on the works of James Joyce. Dr. Kearney, thanks so much for joining us here on the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.
It's been a delight. Thank you.
That will wrap up this edition of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Our thanks to Gary Wolfram from Hillsdale's Economics Department, Joel Pollak, the author of The Agenda, and Dutton Kearney from Hillsdale's English Department. The Radio Free Hillsdale Hour is recorded at the studios of WRFH, the student-run radio station at Hillsdale College. Remember, you can hear new episodes every week on this station. You also can find extended versions of some of our interviews or listen anytime to the podcast. Find it at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio. Until next week, I'm Scot Bertram, and this has been the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour.